Hi everyone and welcome to lesson 4 on topic B4 Bioenergetics. Today's lesson is on respiration. You will need a pen and some paper to complete today's lesson, so if you don't have any in front of you, please pause the video and go and find them now. So today's challenge is to describe what organisms need energy for, and our aspire is to explain the differences between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Okay, the starter for today's lesson is to list all the organelles in an animal and a plant cell. And the extension task is what is the function, so what is the job of each organelle, each part of the animal and plant cell. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to complete this. Off you go. Okay, so the answers then to labelling the plant and animal cell. Number 1 is the cell membrane. If you wrote the function, it controls the movement of substances in and out of the cell. Number 2 was the cytoplasm, and that's the jelly-like substance where chemical reactions happen. Number 3 was the nucleus that carries the genetic information and controls what happens inside the cell. Number 4 is the ribosomes where proteins are made. Number 5 is the mitochondria, and that's where respiration happens. Number 6 are the chloroplasts where photosynthesis occurs. Number 7 is the vacuole, which contains a liquid called cell sap, which keeps the cell firm. And number 8 is the cell wall, and it's made of a substance called cellulose, which supports the cell. So, respiration is an exothermic reaction which is continuously occurring in living cells. So, respiration releases energy for organisms in order for us to survive. So, what do organisms need energy for? So, I would like you to write down your ideas. I'm going to give you 1 minute. Off you go. So organisms need energy for chemical reactions to build larger molecules, for movement and for keeping warm. So respiration always begins with glucose as a reactant. And I want to make something very clear to you now. Respiration is not the same thing as breathing. Breathing is a physical process. It is taking breaths in and out of your body. Respiration is a chemical reaction that occurs inside our cells. So respiration can be either aerobic or anaerobic. So now let's look at aerobic respiration in a little bit more detail. So it is an exothermic reaction, so it does give out heat energy. It uses oxygen, and it takes place in the mitochondria inside our cells. Now, glucose combines with the oxygen that we breathe in. Remember, glucose we take in from our diet, and it produces carbon dioxide, which we then breathe out, produces water, which we can either get rid of by going to the toilet, by breathing it out, and by sweating. And the most important thing is why respiration occurs is to produce lots of energy. Now, anaerobic respiration is where there isn't enough oxygen. And this might be because you're exercising and you don't get enough oxygen to your muscles. So what happens is if there is not enough oxygen combined with the glucose, then lactic acid is produced. Now, some energy is always still produced in anaerobic respiration, and that's important to note. If you are a higher tier candidate, just please remember that blood carries the lactic acid back to the liver, where it is converted back into glucose by reacting it with oxygen. So the oxygen debt is the amount of extra oxygen that the body needs after exercise to remove this lactic acid and convert it back into glucose. Now, anaerobic respiration also occurs in plants and in yeast, and this is a process of fermentation. This is where we actually make alcohol for things such as beer, and this is where glucose is converted into ethanol and carbon dioxide and this releases some energy. Okay, so now what I would like you to do is complete a Venn diagram to compare aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Now on the next slide, I'm going to show you what a Venn diagram looks like. I'd like you to copy this and then, like I said, make the comparison. Now on a Venn diagram, if it just belongs to aerobic, you just write that in the circle of aerobic. If it belongs to anaerobic, you write it the circle where anaerobic is, and then the bit where they overlap, that is something that is common between both types of respiration. So here is your Venn diagram. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to make the comparison between the two different types of respiration. Off you go. Okay, so this is what your Venn diagram should look like. The traits that's true to both aerobic and anaerobic respiration is they are both exothermic reactions. They both use glucose as a reactant. So the traits that's true to aerobic respiration, it uses oxygen. It occurs in the mitochondria of cells. It releases more energy. So this is energy that's used for movement, for keeping warm, and building large molecules. And the equation for aerobic respiration is glucose plus oxygen gives carbon dioxide plus water plus energy. Anaerobic respiration doesn't use oxygen. It releases less energy. In the muscles in humans, the glucose is broken down into lactic acid and some energy. Remember that lactic acid is converted back into glucose in the liver by reacting with oxygen, and that oxygen that's needed to react it in the liver, the amount required is the oxygen debt, so the amount of oxygen we need to pay back to convert that back into glucose. And then in yeast and in plants, the glucose is broken down into ethanol and carbon dioxide and some energy. Now, can you just look at the one on the screen, the Venn diagram on the screen, and look at yours? And if there's any bits that you need to add, I'm just going to leave this on for a minute and a half just to enable you to add any extra bits in there that you don't already have on your Venn diagram. So off you go. Okay, so now for some exam question practice. So oxygen from our lungs is carried by our blood to our cells in our body where aerobic respiration takes place. Complete the two spaces to balance the chemical reaction for aerobic respiration below. And then name the substance within the formula C6H12O6 and name the structures in the cytoplasm of our cells where aerobic respiration takes place. So this is 3 marks here, so that's 3 minutes. Off you go. Okay, so the answers to those questions, it's C6H12O6 plus 6O2 gives 6CO2 plus 6H2O. The substance within the formula that is C6H12O6 is glucose, and the structures in the cytoplasm of our cells where aerobic respiration takes place is in the mitochondria. Okay, so the next question, anaerobic respiration is another form of respiration in living organisms. What is produced during anaerobic respiration in humans? Is it carbon dioxide and lactic acid, or oxygen and water? And it says complete the equation for anaerobic respiration in yeast. So glucose breaks down to carbon dioxide plus what? So you have got 2 minutes to complete this. Off you go. So the answer to the first question is lactic acid is produced during anaerobic respiration in humans, and the equation for anaerobic respiration in yeast is glucose breaks down into carbon dioxide and ethanol. So anaerobic respiration in yeast is called fermentation. So what could we use the products of this reaction for? So what can we use ethanol and carbon dioxide for? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to write down what you think. Off you go. So the answer to the question is what could we use the products of the reaction of fermentation for? We use ethanol to make alcoholic drinks, and we use carbon dioxide for making bread. So a quick progress check now, guys, please. So on your piece of paper, I would like you to write the word equations for the following. If you can, for aerobic respiration, please also write the balanced symbol equation. So I would like it for aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration in animals, and anaerobic respiration in plant and yeast cells. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do this. Off you go. So guys, the three equations that you should have written down for aerobic respiration: glucose plus oxygen gives carbon dioxide plus water plus energy. And the balanced symbol equation for this reaction is C6H12O6 plus 6O2 gives 6CO2 plus 6H2O. The equation for anaerobic respiration in animals is glucose breaks down into lactic acid and a small amount of energy is produced. And anaerobic respiration in plant and yeast cells, the glucose breaks down into ethanol and carbon dioxide. So the next question for you now: how do we get glucose and oxygen into our cells for anaerobic respiration? And how do we get rid of carbon dioxide and the water that is produced? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to write down what you think the answers are to this question. So 2 minutes, off you go. Okay, so the answer to the question, where does glucose and oxygen come from and where do we get rid of carbon dioxide and water? So glucose is absorbed into the blood by our small intestine, so we take glucose in through our food. Oxygen is inhaled into our bodies by our lungs and then it gets diffused into our blood. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the lungs and then exhaled out into the atmosphere. And water can be lost in many ways. It can be lost in our urine, it can be exhaled as water vapour, and also we can lose it out of our bodies as sweat. So this then leads us to the summary of today's lesson. As always, I would like you to copy down these summary notes. I will give you 5 minutes to do so, but if you need any extra time at the end, then please pause the video and carry on copying down the notes. So respiration is a process which occurs in the mitochondria of cells, which releases energy. Organisms need energy to move, keep warm, and build larger molecules from smaller ones. Aerobic respiration uses oxygen and it releases lots of energy. The equation for this is glucose plus oxygen gives carbon dioxide plus water plus energy. Anaerobic respiration occurs without oxygen and it releases less energy. In human muscles, anaerobic respiration produces lactic acid, and in plants and yeast it produces ethanol and carbon dioxide. Anaerobic respiration in yeast is called fermentation, and lactic acid is converted back into glucose in the liver by reacting it with oxygen, and the oxygen debt is the amount of extra oxygen required to do this. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to copy down these notes. Off you go.